Okay, I'll just reiterate on what I said. We need the laws of quantum mechanics to work with quantum computers. So these laws can be summed up with four questions: describing an individual quantum system, uh, performing operations and actions on these quantum systems, like we have the gates in classical computing. Third, having multiple quantum systems working together. And last but not the least, using the information stored in these quantum systems for our purpose. First, let's discuss the first postulate, that is individual quantum systems. Now, like we have the bits 0 and 1 in classical computing, we have uh, a similar analogy, that is qubits. These qubits represent the values 0 and 1, but there is an important factor, an important property of quantum mechanics that makes it different from classical bits. Uh, a qubit can exist in the state 0 and 1 together as a linear superposition. So the bit values 0 and 1 are encoded in the vectors ket0 and ket1. You must have seen this in the last lecture, how ket0 and ket1 are represented. So ket0 and ket1 are also called the standard basis or the computational basis, because most of the computation will be happening in ket0 and ket1, analogous to the classical computing. So the property superposition will look like something like this. Here, as you can see, the ket0 and ket1 are together in the state of a qubit. If And here alpha and beta determine how much they are in, how much ket0 contributes to the superposition and how much ket1 contributes to this superposition. To help you understand this better, imagine a coin. So we will term the state 0 as heads and state 1 as tails. So in terms of classical computing, you'll always get either heads or tails uh, when you're checking a coin. But in terms of quantum computing, imagine spinning a coin. It's spinning on a flat surface, and when you look at it spinning, you have no idea if it will fall, if it will be heads or tails. So this is essentially superposition, where heads and tails exist together. Now, alpha and beta help determine how much during the spin, how much of it is heads, like the chances of the coin being heads, or and beta determines the chances of it being a tail. Yeah. So, but there is one important restrictions when we determine uh, the state vector psi. Psi is basically the state of the qubit. It's a general notation to define any state of a qubit. The important thing is that the norm of psi must always be 1. This is an irrefutable fact when dealing with qubits in quantum computing. And alpha square and beta square determine the probability by which we will get either state 0 or state 1. In terms of the spinning coin, alpha square is basically the probability by which it will fall on heads, and beta square is the probability by which it will fall on the tails. Now, in quantum computing, qubit is a two-dimensional quantum system. Uh, it's similar to having two bits, 0 and 1, but quantum systems also allow us to have an n-dimensional quantum system, that is a qubit. In classical terms, it would be having multiple values of a single bit. That is, a bit can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them together. Yeah, and a general quantum state for an n-dimensional qubit would be this, and this n-dimensional qubit is called a qubit. Now, there are three primary ways to represent a qubit. We'll leave the discussion of qubit. Qubit is not in the scope of this course. We'll just discuss upon qubit. Now, qubit can be represented in multiple ways. First of all is a vector notation, where the zero vector is represented, zero is represented as the 1 0 vector, and 1 is represented as a 0 1 vector. We can also represent 0 and 1 as ket 0 and ket 1, and it's called the direct notation. The superposition would be like this in terms of direct notation, and this would be the superposition in terms of the vector notation. There is another important way to represent a qubit, that is a block sphere. Block sphere is important because these help us represent a qubit geometrically, and we can actually visualize a state of a qubit when looking at a block sphere. So alpha and beta are basically written down as cos theta by 2 and sin theta by 2 e to the power I phi. And this helps us to plot a state of a vector, a state of a qubit in on a sphere. Now the radius of this sphere is 1, as psi should always be 1, as the norm of psi should always be 1. Now you can see that this theta determines its angle from the axis z, and phi is an angle from the axis x. The opposite ends of z axis are ket 0 and ket 1. This is it will be good to understand this notation well later on when you work on single qubits. Now we have discussed how to represent qubits and what a single quantum system is. We need to be able to change the state of these qubits according to our needs, so that we can get the desired result like we get in classical computation. We are able to apply various gates like AND, NOT, NOR gates to perform the operations we need. So there are so what can we use to change the state of a vector? It's trivial to understand that we can use a matrix to change the state of that vector by multiplying it, and this in turns translates to performing operations on a qubit. Now there is another catch in using these matrices. There are certain restrictions that need to be taken care of. As we remember from single quantum states, single quantum systems, that that psi must always remain a unit vector. Its norm must always be 1. So the matrix must be of the form that even after acting upon the vector, its norm must remain as 1. And secondly, another place where classical computing diverges from quantum computing is these operations must be reversible in nature. Now, what does reversible mean? You need to be able to get the qubit, the output from the input, and the input from the output. This deems the operation to be reversible in nature. This is not something that is observed in classical computing, as when you apply the AND gate, you won't be able to understand the input from the output. But in the case of quantum operations, in the case of quantum operations, every operation must follow this law that it must be reversible in nature. Now, the matrices that satisfy this condition are called unitary matrices, and a matrix is unitary in nature when its product and when the product of unitary matrix and its dagger is equal to identity, and it's commutative in nature. Now, since this has described how a operator must be, let's discuss some examples of these operators. First of all, these are they're called the Pauli gates. These are the most basic gates in quantum in quantum operations, and they are respectively identity matrix. It does not change the state of the vector, the x Pauli X matrix, the Pauli Y matrix, and the Pauli Z gate. So X gate, basically the Pauli X gate acts as a quantum NOT gate. Like how we have the NOT gate in classical literature, the X gate flips the bit. If it's 0, it turns it to 1. If it's 1, it turns it to 0. Uh, yeah, it's also called the bit flip gate, as it's trivial to understand that. Next comes the Z gate. It has no specific classical analog, but it's a very important gate because it can change the phase of in front of ket1. Now it'll be more clear when you see how it works. So if it acts on the state 0, you'll get the state 0, but when you act on state 1, you'll get a -1. Yes, the state will turn to -1. So that's why it's called the phase flip gate. Now why it is important? uh, because when in terms of superposition, like here 0 plus 1, the Z gate will only change the plus in front of 1 and it will make it minus. So this is what you call injecting a relative phase in front of 1. So the 0 plus 1 state turns to 0 minus 1 state. You can try to work out the how Y gate acts on the state 0 and 1, and it will be a good exercise for you. Another very important gate is the Hadamard gate. Now, why is this gate important? This gate can create or erase superpositions. If you see it acting on the state 0, it turns into the state 0 plus 1. Now this is called an equal superposition of state 0 and state 1. It's also referred to as the plus state, just for easy notation. And similarly, for when it acts on the state 1, it turns it into 0 minus 1. It's also referred to as the minus state. And conversely, if you apply the Hadamard gate on the plus state and the minus state, you'll get 0 and 1 state respectively. Now, there are also some more gates that are important in nature, which helps you make changes, a bit more custom changes. So they're called the rotation gates. As we saw in the Bloch sphere, the angles, the theta in the Bloch sphere and this theta are not the same. This theta represent how much we want to change the angle of our state. Now, the Rx, Ry, and Rz gates change the state of the vector counterclockwise with respect to that axis. It'll be more clear if you try to work this out as well and try to plot the state which you receive on a Bloch sphere. Another way, this was discussed in the last lecture, but I will reiterate on this because it's so important. This is spectral decomposition. It's used in varieties of proofs when we discuss quantum computing. Spectral decomposition uses eigenvalues and eigenvectors to represent the matrix. The important thing is the matrix should be normal. Other matrices cannot be represented in spectral decomposition, and a matrix is normal when m dagger is equal to m dagger m. And this is how you represent a matrix in the terms of spectral decomposition, where lambda I is the eigenvalue and I ket I bra I forms a orthonormal basis, where I is an eigenvector corresponding to that eigenvalue. Now we have finished the discussion for quantum operations here. If there are any questions, I can see them now. If not, we'll move on to the next two postulates. Okay.
What is dagger?
Okay. So dagger basically means doing the conjugate and the transpose of a matrix. Yeah. Um, we'll find the complex conjugate of every individual element in the matrix and then find the transpose of that matrix. Okay. So I don't see any new questions.
Also,
Uh,
can
yes.
you talk about the difference between global phase and relative phase?
Okay. For that, I'll move on to the previous slide. Yeah. Where we were discussing Z gate. So here, as you can see, uh, when uh, a global phase affects the state as a whole, as in this negative one, when ignored, will not change the state as such. Um, and in terms of relative phase, uh, the relative the negative one cannot be taken out from the complete. It cannot be taken out as a common multiple from the complete state. That is, the state uh, has has changed from a plus state to a minus state. But in terms of just acting upon one, the state remains one in both the cases. That is, we can ignore the negative one as uh, as it would not affect further calculations. Uh, uh, if we want to understand it in classical terms, uh, suppose there is if the bit value is one. Uh, okay, sorry, there is no classical analog to this. Uh, but global phase basically means that you can take out the phase and not change the state in general. uh, this minus will not affect any further calculation if it's just if the state is just one, but this minus will consequently affect the state because it's if it's in a superposition, if the negative one cannot be taken out. So this negative one inside the superposition position is the relative phase when you cannot take it out as a global phase. That will be a relative phase. I hope it was clear. um, Superposition, as I discussed before, is when a state a qubit can be in the state 0 and 1 together as a linear superposition. uh, like again, I'll discuss this example of a spinning coin. A spinning coin, you cannot determine if it's heads or tails, but it's both heads and tails together. So a spinning coin is basically a superposition of heads and tails. uh, a multiple that will affect the state of a qubit is the relative phase. It's not it's the other way around, Ramya. uh,
Do you mind going back to the block series picture and explaining the rotation gates?
okay, yeah, that'll be good. Yeah, okay. So suppose we can see this psi vector here, and I want to stress that theta is not the same as the theta in rotation vectors. Okay, so I'll take a different size so that okay. So that I'll explain the Rx gate. Suppose this is a vector, and we want to apply the Rx gate, and we have chosen to turn it by theta degrees. So the the rotation gate will turn this vector counterclockwise about the axis x. So we'll go like this about the axis x by a angle by theta degrees. Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned before, it'll be good if you work it out manually how rx theta and ry theta and rz theta act on a general state, and then try plotting it on a block sphere.
Oh, and one question that's in the chat that I just want to clear up is the reason behind the theta over 2 in the rotation gates. If you can go to that slide, Mihal.
Okay. Just a second. Yeah.
Right here, so you guys can see that these are rotation gates, and the reason why they're theta over 2 is because we want a unique representation for all the qubit states. So actually theta is bounded between 0 and 2 pi, right? But if you look at a sphere, there is 2 axes of rotation. And since you want a unique rotation for every qubit state, you would want to bound the angle of rotation from 0 to pi and not 2 pi. And that's the reason for the theta over 2.
Yeah. Thank you, Mil. Okay. How do we obtain these matrices for all gates? Okay, one way is the spectral decomposition, or
for single qubit gates, there are identities that you can use to obtain any gates that you can do rotations on a block sphere. And that will be taking a successive multiplications of different rotation gates. So we will stop with the questioning now. If you have any more questions, just put it in the chat and we'll get to it in the next. Take it away, Mihal.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now we'll discuss multiple quantum systems. We discussed how to act on a single qubit, single quantum system, and what a single quantum system is. Now we need to determine what multiple quantum systems are and how can we mathematically model these systems. So tensor product does the job for us to represent multiple qubit states together. So if we do a tensor product of psi and phi, which are both in the complex plane or two-dimensional complex plane, we'll get a vector which is in the four-dimensional plane. So this is essentially representing two qubits with a single vector. Tensor product makes it easier for us to operate on and observe these quantum states together. You can think of a like if psi and phi are vectors with 2 rows, then psi tensor phi will be a vector with 4 rows. Now let's take the computational basis vectors 0 and 1 and try to find out the tensor product of each of them. So 0 tensor 0 is this vector, 0 tensor 1 is this vector, and so on. Now if you notice, there is a pattern here. The one keeps on shifting below. It was similar in terms of 0 and 1, where 0 was 1 0 and 1 was 0 1 vector. You can also represent these vectors as we can omit the tensor sign and represent them like this. I'll show this in the future slides. Now going forward, uh, yeah, sorry. Now, as you can see, if you observe them and try to find the vector product of all these, you'll see that the results form an orthonormal basis over 4 dimensions. And this is actually the tensor product of all possible combinations for the computational basis is actually the computational basis for 4 dimensions. This can be generalized to having, if you have two orthonormal bases b1 and b2 represented by phi and psi, then you can construct a orthonormal basis for the 4 dimensions use by tensoring products of b1 and b2 in all possible combinations, like we did for the computational basis. For the sake of brevity, we will we'll omit the tensor sign and represent the states like this. Now, these are some important tensor product properties. This one is the uh, here. This is called the associative property, where the tensor product is split on the sum, same as the second one. Third one describes the product of scalar with a tensor, and fourth one is about when you take a dagger of the tensor, the individual. Sorry, this is a mistake here. This should be O times here. This will be changed when we send it to you. Okay, so taking dagger of a tensor products becomes bra tensor bra. So ket tensor ket, and the dagger of it becomes bra tensor bra. And if you take the inner product of two tensors, you'll get a scalar, which is basically the inner product of a vector and b vector, and the c vector and d vector. Yeah. Now we have seen two qubit gates. Now there need to be some gates that can act on two qubits as well. So taking this intuition forward, let us try to define two qubit gates by tensoring two single qubit gates. So this is one type of gates that exists for two qubit gates. So the result of a tensor product of two 1-qubit gates will be a 2-qubit gate. So I have taken here x and I. So every element of x 0 1 0 will is multiplied by the identity matrix, and this is what you will get when you perform the calculations, uh, and this is how tensor product of two matrices work. Now the tensor product between two matrices follow all the properties that were stated above, in addition to these two properties. First of all, that the inner product of that A tensor B into C tensor D is basically AC tensor BD, and the trace of A cross A tensor B is the same as the product of their individual traces. This is an important property which is used a lot in proving different concepts. Now, these are the states that are tensor. These are the matrices that are tensor of two different matrices. There are also such two qubit gates that cannot be expressed as a tensor of two individual qubit gates. One such important gate is the C0 gate. C0 gate basically stands for controlled NOT. In controlled NOT, you can you can apply the NOT gate to the target qubit according to the value of the control qubit. So the first qubit is basically the control qubit, and the second qubit is the target qubit. So what C0 does is it basically applies the poly X gate to the target qubit if and only if the control qubit is 1. It's only then that you'll get that you'll flip the target qubit. Uh, the target qubit becomes C XOR Q0 XOR Q1, where Q0 is the first qubit, Q1 is the second qubit. Now C0, you can see from here that the first qubit is 0, so the second qubit does not change. But if the first qubit is 1, the state of the second qubit flips from 0 to vector 1. This will work on superpositions as well. If the second qubit was in a superposition of 0 and 1, the 0 would have been flipped to 1 and the 1 would have been flipped to 0, with their alpha beta remaining. For example, if it was alpha 0 plus beta 1, then it would have become alpha 1 plus beta 0. The C0 gate as a matrix can be represented like this, where this one is basically this is basically the identity matrix, and the bottom one is the X matrix. Yeah. So now this brings us to a interesting crossroads. We represented a gate which cannot be a tensor of two individual quantum gates. Using this intuition, there exists states which cannot be shown as a product of two individual quantum states. This phenomenon is called entanglement. In entanglement, the two qubit states Q0 and Q1 are so tightly bound that they cannot be represented individually. The only way to describe their state is to describe them as joint. So this phi plus is such a state which cannot be represented as a tensor product, and also this is the answer to the bonus question in problem set 1. Now, if we were to say it formally, there exists no psi1 and psi2 in two-dimension plane that phi plus is a tensor of psi1 and psi2. Now this state is called a Bell state, and there are three more Bell states, phi minus, psi plus, and psi minus. And you can see the direct notation form and vector form respectively. One important fact is that these Bell states are all orthonormal in nature. That is, they form a basis, like we had the computational basis, and it's called the Bell basis. And another thing, you cannot represent an entangled state on a Bloch sphere. You can only represent tensor product states on a Bloch sphere. You'll see more about this in the lecture by Adam. He'll discuss that. Now we come to the final postulate. We have covered the basic operations representing multiple qubits together. Now what we need is being able to use the information that we had, the information that we had after performing all those operations, applying all those matrices on the multiple qubit system, and using it for our purpose. So postulate 4 helps us with that. It's we need to answer, how do we extract this information, what will happen when we measure the quantum system, and how do we measure the quantum system. So measuring a quantum system is also called I see there are a lot of questions popping up about tensor product states, so I'll address that first. The 1-1 state is not 1-0, Vidisha. 1-1 state basically represent the tensor of state 1 with it's a tensor between qubit with the state 1 and another qubit with the state 1.
Okay, so let me write down so people have something to see. So 1-1 is going to be equals to the state 1 you tensor that with the state 1, right? So if you want vector representation of that, you would get this, right? And you tensor that with this. Right, if I have more space, I can write down, but it's like on the page. Okay.
Okay, here basically I discussed the tensor products of every individual state, so this can help it.
This one here, right? So you can see that this is a 4-dimensional vectors, right? And this is what represents the 2-qubit states. Do you want to talk a little bit about the price on the bonus questions and why it's so high?
Okay, yeah. So the question was to represent the state, this state in terms of as a tensor product of two individual states. But as I just said, this state cannot be represented as a tensor product of two states. So basically that price is inclaimable because it's just not possible to represent the state as a tensor product because of the quantum property entanglement. Well, sorry for the people who tried that. But yeah, you won't be receiving a prize.
I mean, if we have time, how much time do we have? I can like write a little proof to show that it's actually possible.
Okay, let me find you an empty slide. This works?
Yeah, this works.
Okay.
So let's say we have suppose that it works, right? And we have two states and that they tensor each other. AB tensor CD, which is equals to 1 over square root of 2, 1, 0, 0, 1, right? And this is the Bell states right here, right? So AB tensor CD is going to be equal, if I'm not mistaken, it's A, CD, D, CD, so like that, right? Which is equals to AC, AD, BC, and BD, right? So let's say that AC is equal to 1 over square root of 2, and AD equals 0, right? So that means that D has to be equals to 0 because A cannot be 0, right? So D equals to 0, right? But we have BD is equals to 1 over square root of 2. But here we claim that D equals to 0, but here D obviously cannot be equals to 0 because it has to be multiplied by B to be 1 over square root of 2. So we have a contradiction, and that is why you cannot write a Bell state as a tensor product of two smaller vectors.
Yes. Yeah, I hope this was clear. Yeah, okay, so I'll move forward now. Yeah, about measurements. How do we obtain the information stored in quantum systems for our use? So what measurement is also called is observing the states and yeah, observing the states is basically measuring them like what we have the unique phenomenon of superposition and entanglement. Measurement is also unique to quantum systems because performing a measurement will alter the state of the qubit irreversibly. You cannot go back to the same superposition or the state which you had before performing a measurement. This so to model this phenomenon of measurement, we'll use the notion of something called as projective or von Neumann measurement. And we need to define three different set of operators to be able to perform measurements. Again, the most important point here is you cannot get back the state that you had before measurement. So the three class of operators are Hermitian operators, a Hermitian operator, an operator M will be Hermitian if M is equal to M dagger. And an important property is that all of the eigenvalues are real for Hermitian operators. Second, positive semi-definite operators. These operators only have non-negative eigenvalues, and thus they are called positive semi-definite. Like a Hermitian operator with non-negative eigenvalues will be a positive semi-definite operator. And an orthogonal projection operator is a Hermitian operator where they have the eigenvalues 0 and 1. This also implies that the square of the projector is equal to the projector itself. It will be a good exercise for you to prove that. A hint for you that you'll have to use spectral decomposition to prove this equality. Now, how can we use projectors? What are projectors? So projectors are basically, yeah, as we discussed, the eigenvalues can only be 0 and 1 for projectors. So the spectral decomposition will be of the form pi equal to sigma psi I, ket psi I, bra psi I. So this is just the sum over the eigenvectors, where, yeah, psi I is the orthonormal set of eigenvectors. And similarly, if you sum the eigenvectors in this manner, you'll get a projector. It is guaranteed that you will get a projector. And now, what exactly does a projector do when you apply it on a on a state phi? So when you perform the calculations, this phi will basically transfer, will be multiplied by this phi, and this will give us a scalar. This is a scalar, and this complete vector is actually within the span of psi I, as in it's a linear combination of the eigenvector psi I. It does not depend on phi. I mean, it does depend as the scalar, but you don't have the terms of phi after performing the projection. Yeah. So now we need to work more upon these projective measurements. For projective measurements, we need to have projector which have rank 1, and a rank 1 projector would be represented by this, represented like this, and the rank of a projector can be determined by the number of non-zero eigenvalues it has. Now, a projective measurement is defined as a set of projectors with rank 1. Every projector should have a rank 1, and the set of these projectors is called a projective measurement. Now, this projective measurement should follow a law that the sum of the projective measurements is actually identity. When you sum every individual projector in the projective measurement, you'll get identity. This is called the completeness relation. And if every element is rank 1, then we say the measurement is happening in the psi I basis, because every projector is psi I. So for example, if we have the projectors ket 0 bra 0 and ket 1 bra 1, then the measurement will happen in the computational basis. This is an important point when working with questions on related to measurements, as in what basis you are measuring in. It's basic. If you want to, it can be interpreted as from what perspective you are looking at the state vector. If you're looking at it from the computational basis, you will get a different result. If you're looking at it from the plus minus basis, you'll get a different result. Now, we need to measure the first of all, we need to measure the since in quantum systems we have superpositions. We need to first measure the probability by which we will get a certain state. So if we have a quantum system in a state psi, and there are m possible outcomes for that state. Suppose for the general state alpha 0 plus beta 1, we have the possible alpha 0 and beta 1. We have the possible outcomes of 0 and 1. Let's define that we have these possible outcomes. So using this equation, we can find the probability of obtaining 0 outcome for the state psi, and or obtaining the outcome 1 for the state psi. Yeah. So 0 and 1 basically represent 0 outcome would denote the projector 0, and the 1 outcome would represent the projector 1. So yeah, so here to measure the probability of getting the outcome 0, you'll replace this projector with this, since we are trying to measure the outcome 0. And these equalities follow, first of all, because of the cyclic property of the trace, that is, you can switch among any trace, any component in trace. That is basically, if you have this is equivalent to having, although it does not make any sense, as physically it does not make any sense, but what I want to say is you can switch among them to determine the property of the cyclic property of a trace. And the third equality will follow because pi square is equal to pi, because pi is a projector there. Yeah. Now I have worked out a measurement here using in the computational basis. So what we're measuring is outcome 0 and 1 for psi, alpha 0 and beta 1. So as you can see, psi, I have substituted psi here as alpha 0 and bra psi as well. Now I'll use the cyclic property of trace and basically get this 0 here, bra 0 there, and this will evaluate to alpha, and this will also evaluate to alpha, and the probability of outcome would be alpha square, as we had seen in when we were discussing single qubit gates at the start. Similarly, you can try to work out the probability of obtaining 1 as the outcome, and it will be magnitude beta square, the outcome for outcome 1. Yeah. Now we have got the probability of measuring outcomes. Now we need to we stated before that the outcome will irreversibly change when we perform a measurement. So when we perform a measurement, what will that state be? So the state collapses to this particular state where the pi I is the outcome that we were measuring, and we calculate the norm, because this will because this need not be unit 1 in nature. That is why we divided by its magnitude. Again, I work it out here. So where we will calculate the final state assuming that the outcome will be 0. Again, we do not know what will the outcome be, so that's why we calculate the probability first, and assuming we have uh, one outcome, will calculate what will the final state be for that outcome. Now I substitute pi I to be ket 0 bra 0, and similarly substitute phi psi and divide it by the norm. On calculation, you'll achieve the state ket 0. Uh, it's easy to understand that when we were trying to measure, when we were trying to get the final state for outcome 0, it will be 0 because we were using the computational basis of 0 and 1. So the possible states will be in the terms of 0 and 1. And since we're getting the outcome 0, the state will be 0. But this changes when you have a different computational basis, but your psi is represented uh, in a different basis. So for example, if we had the basis plus and minus as the measurement basis, then you would see a different outcome here. This is also a problem in the problem set, and you'll be using these formulas to perform uh, to find the probability of outcome and the final state assuming that outcome. Do work it out, will be a good exercise for you to understand how measurement works. So yeah, that's it from my side. I'll take any doubts right now. Thank you so much for listening. Don't leave the meeting yet, because this will follow a practical lecture by Adam, who will explain the basics, all these concepts that I discussed using Qiskit, the IBM Q's platform